Now let's talk a little about ecosystem services. We have a definition of ecosystem services that was popularized in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment publication, which says that ecosystem services are the benefits provided to people, both directly and indirectly, by ecosystems and biodiversity. Although this definition is relatively new in the publication of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, the reality is that the concept of ecosystem services was used long before and was very popular among ecologists and technicians, especially in the 70s. And here I want to emphasize that in the concept of ecosystem services there are two basic elements: benefits and people. It is a concept centered on human beings as beneficiaries. And this leads us to the fact that by definition, an ecosystem service must be linked to an identifiable set of human beneficiaries. Ecosystem services are classified into four types. Provisioning services, services related to the amount of goods or raw materials that an ecosystem offers, such as wood, water, or food. Regulating services, services derived from key functions of ecosystems, which help reduce certain local and global impacts, for example, regulation of the climate and the water cycle, control of soil erosion, pollination. Cultural services, services that are related to free time, leisure, or more general aspects of culture. Supporting services, ecosystem services that are necessary to produce all other ecosystem services. Some examples include biomass production, atmospheric oxygen production, soil formation and retention, nutrient cycling, water cycling, and habitat provisioning. To reinforce this classification of ecosystem services, a regulating service is the benefit provided by ecosystem processes that moderate natural phenomena, air quality, climate, water runoff, erosion, natural hazards, pollination are related to this service. A provisioning service is any type of benefit to people that can be extracted from nature. Food, fiber, biomass, fuel, freshwater, and natural medicines are related to this service. A cultural service is a non-material benefit that contributes to the development and cultural advancement of people. Ethical values, existence values, recreation, and ecotourism are related to this service. And finally, supporting services are those necessary for the production or the maintenance of all other ecosystem services. Nutrient cycling, water cycling, soil formation, and photosynthesis are related to this service. Now, we are going to see some examples of each type of ecosystem services. In the case of provisioning services, some examples are water for consumptive use, for drinking, domestic use, and agricultural and industrial use. Water for non-consumptive use is also considered as provisioning service, and this is related to generating power and transport or navigation. Also, aquatic organisms for food and medicines are considered as a provisioning service. Some examples of regulating services are maintenance of water quality, natural filtration and water treatment, buffering of flows, erosion control and flood control. In cultural services, in the category of recreation we find river rafting, kayaking, hiking, fishing as a sport, tourism, existence values like personal satisfaction from free-flowing rivers, for example. Finally, as an example of supporting services we can find the nutrient cycling, the role in maintenance of floodplain fertility, primary production, predator-prey relationships, and ecosystem resilience. So, these are some examples of each type of ecosystem services. I hope it is useful to clarify a little bit more the concepts. In this slide taken from a Postal and Richter publication in 2003, I just want to quickly review some of the most important impacts of human activities on ecosystem services. So very quickly. The first is dam construction, with an impact on ecosystems that alters timing and quantity of river flows. Water temperature, nutrient and sediment transport, delta replenishment, and it also blocks fish migrations. Services at risk. provision of habitat for native species, recreational and commercial fisheries, maintenance of deltas and their economies, productivity of estuarine fisheries. The second human activity is dike and levee construction. The impact destroys hydrologic connection between river and floodplain habitat. Services at risk: habitat, sport and commercial fisheries, natural floodplain fertility, natural flood control. Diversions as a human activity. Impact depletes stream flow. Services at risk: habitat, sport and commercial fisheries, recreation, pollution dilution, hydropower and transportation. Draining of wetlands as direct driver. Eliminates key component of aquatic ecosystem. And in terms of services at risk, natural flood control, habitat for fish and waterfowl, recreation, natural water purification. Deforestation and land changes. Alters runoff patterns, inhibits natural recharge, fills water bodies with silt. Services at risk: water supply quality and quantity, fish and wildlife habitat, transportation, and flood control. Release of polluted water effluents. Reduces water quality. And some services at risk are water supply, habitat, commercial fisheries, recreation. Over-harvesting. Associated with a direct impact that depletes species populations. Some services at risk: sport and commercial fisheries, waterfowl, other biotic populations. Introduction of exotic species. Eliminates native species, alters production and nutrient cycling. Services at risk: sport and commercial fisheries, waterfowl, water quality, fish and wildlife habitat, transportation. Release of metals and acid-forming pollutants into the atmosphere as a direct driver since it alters chemistry of rivers and lakes. And services at risk: habitat, fisheries, recreation, and water quality. Finally, the human activity associated with emission of climate-altering air pollutants. It is identified as potential for changes in runoff patterns from increase in temperature and changes in rainfall. And some services at risk: water supply, hydropower, transportation, fish and wildlife habitat, pollution dilution, recreation, fisheries, and flood control. So, this is a list of how human activities affect or impact ecosystems, and how these activities put some of the ecosystem services at risk. But to close this section on ecosystem services, I want to present this final message of opportunity that is identified in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment publication. It says, freshwater can make a greater contribution to human well-being if society improves the design and management of water resource infrastructure, establishes more inclusive governance and integrated approaches to water management, and adopts water conservation technologies, demand management, and market-based approaches to reallocation that increase water productivity. So, although human activities impact ecosystems and can put ecosystem services at risk, there is a great opportunity, recognized in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, to increase human well-being from freshwater ecosystem services. But it requires a change in the way in which we manage and think about water. The opportunity is there, and it is also time to move to a more sustainable process. That's the key message.